Stage directions in An Inspector Calls. The passage in front of you is from the end of Act 2. It's a rather pivotal moment in the play. The words are interesting, but in An Inspector Calls, Priestley ensures that the stage directions tell the actors quite specifically how they are to perform, what they are to do, when they are to do it. And because we are studying this as a drama text, but of course we have the words in front of us, it is prudent, it is wise to use the stage directions. If we look at this section here from here onwards and then to the end of Act 2, the stage directions offer a lot of information. We're told that Sheila begins crying quietly, and while Mrs. Burling turns to the inspector. We're just building up to the revelation of that Eric is the father of Eva Smith's unborn child. Why does Sheila begin crying quietly? Because Sheila has begun to recognise Eric's guilt. She knows what he is concealing. The fact that she is crying quietly is an attempt to sort of contain her emotion. Mrs. Burling, because she turns to the inspector, it reveals their absence of warmth in the sort of mother-daughter relationship. Her daughter is crying, she's upset. Does she go and calm her, to help her? No. She turns her attention to the inspector and seeks to rebuke him, and if you take some steps, and so on and so forth. We're told that the inspector says, "Don't worry, Mrs. Burling, I shall do my duty." But he says it grimly, and the fact that it's grim reveals that he doesn't necessarily enjoy what he is doing. It's not supposed to be pleasant. Why does he look at his watch? Well, throughout the text we're supposed to see how the inspector is the master of time. At this stage he looks at his watch because it's suggesting that Eric is about to appear just as he was expecting it to. The two theories of time that apply in the text are Ouspensky's theory of time, which is like a form of Groundhog Day, where you live your life over and over and over again until you get it right. And the second theory of time is that of Dunn's theory, which is the ability to look backwards and forwards in time and therefore alter your behaviour as a consequence. Those perhaps apply a little bit later in the text, but the fact that he looks at his watch symbolises his control. Mrs. Burling says, "I'm glad to hear it." But it's triumphantly. "I'm glad to hear it! I'm glad to hear it!" She thinks she's won. The victory that is apparent in a word like triumphantly is so significant. Significant mainly because the audience, along with Sheila, are now beginning to realise. This is where we have a little bit of dramatic irony beginning to come into the text. We know a little bit more than the characters do. So the inspector begins to wait. Now if we move on, he's asked what for. The inspector says, "To do my duty." Sheila is distressed. She's upset. It leads us to question, why is she distressed? Is she distressed because of Eric's guilt? Is she distressed because she feels pity for Eric? Is she distressed because she feels sorrow for Eva Smith and the unborn child? Is she feeling a sense of grief because they've been caught? It's a little bit ambiguous. But the phrase here, "understanding now," is the one which reveals that Mrs. Burling has finally, the penny is finally dropped. Now, given that I've said this is about stage directions, some unofficial stage directions, if you like, are the uses of punctuation. Here we have 2 uses of ellipsis, 3 uses of ellipsis in fact. But surely, I mean, it's ridiculous. Those heavy, dramatic, lingering pauses tell the actor how to perform the role of Mrs. Burling, but they begin to demonstrate just how dumbfounded she is. Previously so full of words, now she is silenced. Burling equally silenced. She stops and exchanges a frightened glance with her husband. Terrified now sternly, thunderstruck, agitated. The words themselves are useful, but a stage direction like thunderstruck is really quite emotive. What does thunderstruck mean? It means that he's so utterly disbelieving that words fail him. And we see how words fail him in the utterance itself. These hyphens are significant of his interruptions, how he interrupts himself. They're not just pauses like we have with ellipsis. It's the sense that he's trying to speak continuously, but is unable to do so. And perhaps Mr. Burling is unable to speak fluently because of the news he has just heard, but also because of his class. We're told at the very beginning of the text that he is a social climber, that he is of an inferior class to his wife, who is her husband's social superior. Such hyphens are a feature of Mr. Burling's utterances all the way throughout the text, perhaps to symbolise his social climber status, how he is the embodiment of the nouveau riche. But it's this last stage direction here that I just want to pay the most attention to. The inspector holds up a hand. We hear the front door. They wait, looking towards the door. Eric enters, looking extremely pale and distressed. He meets their inquiring stares. And the curtain falls quickly. The inspector's authority is supreme at this moment. He is able to silence each of the Burlings with a simple hand gesture. How powerful is that? We're told at the beginning of the text that he need not be a big man, but he creates at once an impression of massiveness, purposefulness, for instance. And here we have the embodiment of that massiveness, his supreme control. And now what we have on the stage is simply noises. A door is being opened and probably slammed. They look towards the door. Eric is now pale and distressed, and his paleness is a sign of his guilt. But he meets their inquiring stares. And therefore the stage direction tells us, just as the acting would tell us, that Eric is a different character. Because while he is guilty, he is beginning to accept his guilt. By looking at them as they stare at him, he is no longer trying to conceal anything. The truth is out, and he is prepared to admit it. And this is a really good example of how Eric is, like Sheila, prepared to take responsibility, accept the errors of the past, and change and reform into a better, well-rounded, arguably, perhaps, more socialist human being. The curtain falls quickly to heighten the drama.